Good morning, family.
Good morning.
So, as most of you know, I had a short bout of COVID. It really wasn't that bad. I pretty much just sat at home and did nothing. I didn't get real sick or anything like that, so I'm very thankful for that. Oddly enough, it was only a couple days before coming down with it that I was talking to Russ about how I didn't take any of it seriously. So, I don't know. Sometimes you feel like God's just telling you to shut up. But I want to say I'm thankful for everyone that reached out to me and checked in on me while I was sick. I hope we always remember to do that. It's such an encouragement to people. Sarah Alberts brought me soup, which I always talk to my wife about how I thought it was odd. Nobody believed I could cook in the absence of my wife. Like, I only got fat because of her. But, I was starting to think about it after she dropped it off, and I was thinking about it. I'm like, I think that's the only person in my entire life other than Beth Potter one time who brought me soup when I was sick. So that's pretty cool. I also learned why she doesn't bring it to potlucks, because most of us would forget about Rudy's meatballs if she did, because she makes really good soup. Today, the elders have asked me to talk about how to be lovable. I've talked to you guys about love quite a bit. It kind of permeates almost. Sorry, we good? Is that good? All right. It kind of permeates most of my lessons. I think it's a foundational lesson in our faith. But it was kind of an odd request, I'll be honest, because the word lovable doesn't actually appear in Scripture. It's just not there. In fact, the Bible really doesn't, on the surface at least, say a whole lot about what it means to be a lovable person. The Bible mostly focuses on our responsibility to love others. So I had to kind of do some reasoning on it. It's always nice when the elders give you a topic and you can just go to a verse and be like, okay, well, this is what the Bible says about this. But no, they've decided I have to think for myself. So here we go. First of all, do you guys remember the lesson I gave you about respect and the role that it plays in a Christian's life? How the world tells us that to get my respect, you must earn my respect, and how a Christian should be looking at it, I'm going to give you respect until I no longer have a reason to respect you, simply because you exist. Now, a fundamental lesson in that message is that people naturally tend to reciprocate. They will reflect their environment, which takes us down a whole different road, which is a lesson for another day. The point being, what you give to people, most of the time, they are naturally going to desire to give back to you. If you respect people, they will naturally want to respect you. It doesn't matter where you found them or what walk of life they come from. That's the rule. That's how it works. It doesn't matter if you go into a doctor's office or you go into a prison yard. You're going to find the same rule. If I go in there and I respect the people I'm around, I'm going to find that the vast majority of them is going to reciprocate and give me respect. So, to be lovable, the conclusion I've come to is the best way, the easiest way, the most perfect way to be lovable is to love. When you love others, they are naturally going to reciprocate that. For instance, children, little, small children, all right, like Eden's age, they have people that they really, really like, and they have people that they really, really don't like. And most of the time, it's impossible to figure out why. So you all know Bailey's brother Landon, right? Who Eden affectionately calls Lala, which I think is hilarious, by the way. So Uncle Lala is the scariest dude in the planet when he's around, right? This little girl will not cross the room to go see him until he's been there for at least a couple of hours. And it doesn't matter how often he comes over, every single time. Nothing to do with him until he's been there for a couple of hours, right? She really has to warm up to him. But when he's not there, he is, other than Mama and Dada and a couple of others, he is by far one of the top 10 most used names in our household. Constantly. She picks up one of her toy phones. Who are you calling, Eden? Uncle Lala. But she doesn't want him when he's around. My point is, in all of this is, kids are a really good reflection of how this works. You see, she thinks he's big and scary because he's big, loud, and has a beard, which she has a thing about. But ultimately, she cares very deeply for him. It's very obvious by how often she thinks about him when he's not there. And you can find this in most relationships, but almost never as clear-cut as with a child. It's what allows us to reconcile with one another. When a child is estranged from their parents, it is only through displays of love that healing comes about. It's through a persistence of love. So, my real conclusion to the answer of what does God say about being lovable is not a lot. But if you want to be lovable, you can start by loving others. Now, there's a few things that go into this. I promise that's not the entirety of the message. I promise there's scriptures I brought. So here we go. First is our instruction to love. And we've gone over those things. And so I won't dwell specifically on our instruction to love. But there's interesting points about love. Ones that tell you why it makes you lovable. For instance, if you go to 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8, there's actually a couple verses we're going to be using from 1 Peter chapter 4. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8 says, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. You do realize that this verse isn't telling you that as long as you're a loving person, that your sins are just forgiven. God's very clear on what forgives your sins in his eyes. He's saying it covers a multitude of sins. This is the nature of love. This is the nature of relationship. When I love you, when I show that love on a continual basis, there's going to be times when I'm short with you. There's going to be times when I say something that offends you deeply sometimes. There's going to be times when I let you down, when I can't be there for you, when I hurt you, when I just disappoint you. There are going to be times when I just don't measure up. But because of that love, forgiving me becomes easy. Now, I've always had one best friend throughout my life. Now, who that is has changed periodically as I have changed and my relationships have changed. But throughout my life, I've always had one person that kind of takes the place of best friend. Most of us, at least, I don't know. Maybe it's this way for everyone, but I could say most men at least are in this position. We have friends, but there's this one person, right? That's our guy. That's who we go to. That's who we're vulnerable with. That's who we call when we need advice or when we need help or just when we need to complain, right? We have that one best friend, and he knows what we're thinking in a situation without us actually telling him what we're thinking because we're that close. I've always had one best friend. Now, I didn't grow up with siblings, but I grew up with a best friend who had a sibling, right? So my best friend when I was younger, his name was Jared. And he had an older brother. He's older than us by about 4 years. Biggest jerk you could ever imagine. I mean, we were kind of nerds, and he was very much a jock. He was part of the high school football team. You could about imagine what that looked like. So, needless to say, he was not very kind to us most of the time. I remember we'd go over to his house, and he would pick on both of us to the ends of the earth. I mean, to the point of making us absolutely miserable. And I remember I was in school. We were at the high school because we were at a football game. And some of his football buddies decided that it was okay for them to pick on Jared. And his big brother, Zach, found us. I was being held up against a wall in the locker room while they were attempting to give Jared a swirly. He got kicked off the football team because 4 of them were no longer able to play football. It was odd at first because Zach spent so much time tormenting us. But Jared never had a problem overlooking all of those slights, no matter how long he had to endure them, no matter how many they became, because Jared always knew that when it came to Jared versus the world, Zach was always going to stand in its way. This is ultimately the ultimate expression of love, right? We saw that in the verse that we just talked about. The greatest form a man has, the greatest form of love a man can show is to offer his life for a friend. Now, was Zach in danger of dying? Probably not. Our football team was not really that good. But it says something about a man who will put himself in the way of bodily harm to protect somebody. What does that say about spiritual warfare and those who share the trenches of it? What should our love look like? Sometimes that's standing between them and the fire, as the book of Jude puts it, to pull them from the fire. To literally get between the one you love and the results of sin. Sometimes it'll be bodily harm. Sometimes it'll be risking oneself emotionally. Sometimes it means just taking a risk. Because ultimately, love requires humility and vulnerability. I say it requires humility because really what love is a prioritization of someone else. Grandparents are very fond, a lot of grandparents are very fond of bragging about how well they spoil their grandkids. Okay? Some are. They're all spoiled. Don't get me wrong. I've not met a grandkid who has not been spoiled. But I want to point something out. If you look at that relationship, right, that idea of spoiling my grandkids, and as a parent, I get annoyed, right? Because Eden's grandparents, they buy toys and they buy toys and they buy toys. I'm like, well, you've got 3 rooms of toys in a 2-bedroom house. Stop buying this stuff, right? Or in grandma's case, they buy shoes and they buy shoes and they buy shoes. And I'm like, she's got 37 pairs of shoes. She owns more shoes right now at 2 years old than I have had in 32 years. Stop buying shoes. She's almost got more than she has outfits. So as a parent, it's frustrating sometimes. It's quite annoying. But really, a grandparent spoiling a grandchild shows that definition of love in the highest sense. What does a grandparent get out of spending money and time and effort on their grandchildren? There's no tangible reward. There's not. You might find pleasure in the results of spoiling your grandchild, but there's no tangible reward. If anything, it's costing you. So why do they do it? Because love means prioritizing. They love that grandchild, and so the reward of seeing them smile and seeing them happy and seeing them thankful is much higher than the cost of giving it to them. That's love. Love is so important because it brings about unity. That's why we must be lovable. Because the idea of being lovable invites people in, not just into our lives, not just into our church, but it actually invites them in to share in that which makes us lovable, which is God. It all comes from Him. So when we present ourselves as somebody who is easy to love, we actually invite them in to learn about that which makes it easy to love us. This is the real idea behind living our life in such a way that people see Christ through us. If Colossians chapter 3, verse 14 says, "And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony." How many of your family, how many of you go home or go to a family reunion or a family meal and can honestly say that your house is the definition of harmony? I've been to a lot of family meals in my life through people I was dating or the woman I'm now married to or just family friends or friends of mine and going to their family meals and the foster home. I've been to a lot of family meals. And do you know what the most singular, most pleasant, most peaceful meals I've ever found? Potlucks. Nobody fights at potlucks. Nobody throws their empty, torn up drumstick at each other. Nobody hits each other in the face with a biscuit. Nobody's throwing green beans across the table. Nobody's cussing. There's not some weird old guy in the corner drinking too much. Potlucks are the most peaceful meal I've ever shared with a person. Now, my meals alone, they're very peaceful, okay? So that kind of might take precedent. But why is it that we can be that way with each other? Because let me just be clear and honest. There is a lot of people in this room that would prefer to spend less time with certain people in this room. I'm not stupid, and I don't have to sit here and argue the point. You know it's true. I know it's true. We all have people we just prefer to spend less time around. Yet we don't pick fights with them. We don't get obstinate. We don't get easily offended when we share a meal with them. Why is that? Because harmony is easy to come by when the most important thing in your life is shared with somebody. Peace is easy to find when the greatest purpose you have is the greatest purpose they have. You take the military, for instance, right? I've had a lot of friends that served in the military. I've had friends served in the Army, friends that served in the National Guard, friends that served in the Marine Corps. I've had friends that served in the Navy. I have not made friends with anyone served in the Air Force, but I'm sure I will one day. Actually, I think I have now. There's some certain older people that have served in the Air Force. Did Rudy? I didn't even know that. Anyways, the point is, the most common thing I've found among military people, especially when other military people aren't around from other branches, is they love talking about how their branch is the greatest and how one certain branch is the absolute worst thing ever. They're all idiots. They're all, less than men and blah, 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 blah. Right? The Marine Corps talks bad about the Army. The Army talks bad about the Marine Corps. The Navy everyone talks bad about the Air Force, but the Navy likes to especially talk bad about the Air Force, and nobody likes the Coast Guard at all. This is the general rule of thumb that I have found talking to people who've served. But God help you if you, having not served in the military, talk ill about the Army to somebody who served in the Marines. Why? Because those people share a purpose. They share a purpose that permeates every aspect of their lives, and it is impossible to actually hate somebody like that. That's why you put up with so much from your siblings. Because you have one of the most powerful forces in your life in common, your parents. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 2 through 3 continues this idea of unity. It says, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. There is a lot of these verses that talk about how we relate to others of faith, right? How we relate to other people in the room. But think about this. The idea of unity also involves unifying faith with others. To be clear on the point, what I'm saying is, while these verses are specifically talking about how we relate to one another, it indicates a very, very deep importance on how we relate to those who are not saved, those who are unchurched, those who have not put their faith in God, however you want to word people of that category. So one could ask, well then, Nathan, why do you argue that we have to be lovable to those people? Right? Because then I'll look like the world. I can't look like the world. Right? I can't sit here and be nice to a homosexual. I can't tolerate somebody who has committed adultery. I can't do those things. They're horrible people. They're living lives of sin. I can't put up with that. I can't have that in my life, surely, right? Do you know what actually makes talking about God effective? Do you know why benevolence is so important and effective? Because it's a loving endeavor. I want to indicate something to you that I hope some of you have pieced together on your own, and if not, I hope that you'll listen to this. When we are lovable, By showing love to others, we indicate something very important to us, are very important to them and very central to us. First John chapter 4, verse 8. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. Understand, the verse does not say God is loving. It does not say God is lovable. God literally defines himself to us as love. He is telling, this is who I am. If you know what this is, then you know who I am. Back to the beginning, all the way. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So what do these two verses tell you about yourself? God created you in his image. And God is love. A plus B equals C. Therefore, you are created in the image of love. You see, when we show love to others, we return to our intended purpose in life. We, at that point, actually fulfill what God created us to be. So, another reason why I say this is so important is found in the book of John. So if you'll turn there with me, I'd like to look at chapter 1 of John. Start in verse 9. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. Yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Now, when I was younger and I saw psychiatrists and therapists and all kinds of, specialists. And I lived with a fear that I had psychopathic tendency. I was convinced of this as a teenager because I had such a hard time understanding other people. I mean, I had friends who would lose loved ones, and I had no way of understanding why they grieved. I'd never lost a loved one, so I couldn't empathize, but I actually had no sympathy for the grief. It didn't matter what we were. I had no sympathy for other people's emotions. This is something we expect out of somebody who's tired of life, not a 14-year-old. I couldn't relate. I loved nobody. There was nobody in my life that I would honestly say I didn't think was disposable. It was so much so that when I did bounce from foster home to foster home, I actually did not mind it. It didn't bother me at all. I felt no abandonment. I felt no neglect. It was just life. This did not change until the day I found myself back there. Even into my adult life, I had no concern, no way of having compassion, no empathy for the emotions and feelings of others. And to be fair, there is some psychological reasons for this. I, in fact, do not have psychopathic tendencies, but I had no way of relating to any of it. You cannot reflect something that does not exist. There were people in my life that expected me to reflect empathy and compassion and love into a world that had never shown me what it looked like. It was impossible. Interestingly enough, most of you have come to know that I care very deeply for everyone. It doesn't matter what their situation or lot in life. Every person, in my eyes, is extremely valuable and deeply important to me. This is a new development. And to be clear, I had no way of understanding it at first. It was completely new to me. This idea of seeing people as having value. It's one of the reasons I preach about, because to me, that was this massive world-changing epiphany. See, most of you guys grow up learning that people have value. I learned it at the age of 23. That brings me to the reason why it's so important to reflect that love out into the world with those who don't believe, with those who aren't Christians. You see, John chapter 1 teaches us that God actually offers you adoption, to be adopted into the title of being a child of God, to be adopted into the inheritance of Jesus Christ, to be adopted into having a place in eternity. He adopts you into that. He offers that to all people. Anyone who would accept it. Why can he do that? Because God already loves everybody. That's not up for debate. It's not a question. Their salvation only relies on whether they're willing to reciprocate. But here's the thing. God's love is difficult for those who don't have their attention brought to it, because it permeates everything. God's love is this massive, vague, overwhelming presence. All of existence reflects his love. But the thing is, most people don't know that that's what it's reflecting. So they look to a more human idea. That's why it's so important for us to be lovable people, because when we're lovable, we encourage and invite them to love us, and in doing so, we return them to their original intended purpose. And when you are reflecting the nature of God, you will accept God. I've met a lot of men in my life who look a lot like their fathers, who act a lot like their fathers. I have never met a man who acts like his father who hates his father. If you return people to a state of open, unadulterated, pure love, they will come to accept God's love. Because when it becomes a part of them, it's impossible not to see. I think that this is something we must go over anytime we bring up the topic of love. Because love can be such a vague word to us. I can point at it. right? When I see it, I know I'm seeing it. When I see love that parents have for their children, when I see love that siblings share, when I see love spouses share, I can point to it. I know that that's what I'm seeing, but ask me to write it down on paper. I don't know that my understanding would fit on one page, because that's how many words I would take to try to explain what it is I'm seeing. But God defines it pretty well, and he's not defining it, okay? I want you to understand this before I read the verse. He's not defining love. He's showing you the results of love so that you can understand what love is and is not. If it reflects these things, then love is evident and apparent. And if what you're seeing is not reflecting these things, then love is absent. He's not defining love, he's telling you the evidence of love. So, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 through 7. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Most of you could probably point most of those out and say, well, I think you can see that in my marriage. Most of you would even go so far as to argue, well, I think you could see most of this in the relationship I have with my children or with my parents. There are even some of you that would say, well, I think you could see most of this in the relationship I share with the other people in my church. But as we talked about, what invites people to be loving is being lovable. And the way you're lovable is to be loving, which puts the first step on us. So when you meet the orphans, because I understand without God, that's what people are. We were created to be his children. When we sin and are separated from him, we lose our Father. They're not just lost sinners, they are orphans. And God is pretty clear on what he expects us to do with orphans. And at no point does he say ignore them. At no point does he say angrily rebuke them. He says look out for them. Look out for their cause. We must be lovable to those outside of the faith. Because through being lovable, through showing them love, we actually invite them to the adoption. We focus so much on programs. I mean, not us Cedarloo. I mean, us Christians. I mean, we talk about evangelism, and I try to talk about it, and Lord knows we need to talk about it. It's extremely important. We even call it our commission to be evangelists, but we focus so hard on the tactics and the strategies. What works, what doesn't work. Well, we can't go out door knocking anymore. Nobody wants us to send them letters or newsletters anymore. No, nobody wants to come to church at the first invitation. And what programs work? Let's use Fishers of Men. Let's look at World Bible School. On and on and on and on. We're so focused on the programs. And everybody that comes up with a program will tell you this is the program that scriptures use. Trust me, I've had entire classes, read at least a couple dozen books on different kinds of programs, and every single one of them says, let's get back to scripture. This is the program the Bible uses. That seems pretty odd to me that 450 different programs are found in the Bible. And when you dig through them, you can see evidence of some ideas, but God hardly started in on a door knocking campaign. He certainly didn't send letters to people's houses. So what's the real program of the Bible? What did Jesus do to reach so many people? He cared. There wasn't some kind of logistical program to go house to house. There wasn't some great Bible study he came up with so that he could sit somebody down and convince him of the truth. He cared about them. And because he cared about them, they grew to care about him. And because they cared about him, they were ready to listen when he spoke the truth. He didn't demand that they had faith in God before he healed them. He healed them because that person came to him out of desperation, and to him, that was faith enough. The idea that somebody would take what they need and they would put all their hope in one basket, that is faith. It's not a great faith. It's not even an enduring faith, but it's faith enough. It's faith enough for me to look after you and to be concerned about you and to teach you. There's not some 6-step program. There's not some great evangelistic technique. You want to know how to teach people about God? Show them what he is. Show them their original intended purpose in life. And do it in the extreme. Lord knows I'm not a big advocate for radicalism. I'm very moderate at everything. In my views, in the way I see the world, in the way I think we should treat one another. For the most part, I am moderation in everything. But in this, there's no moderation. You must let love define the very essence of who you are. And in that moment, you reflect God the most purely to the rest of the world. God does not need you to convince people of him. You reflect God. He will draw them to him through that. He doesn't need you to be a scholar. He doesn't need you to have the greatest technique. He doesn't need you to have the best Bible study to reach people. He needs you to show them who he is so that they can see it, so that they can be drawn to it, so that they can want it. But you think about how busy people's lives are. All right, man works 40 hours a week, if he's lucky. There's a great many men I know that work 50, 60, 70 plus hours a week. But let's say he works 40 hours a week. Then he has to sleep 40 hours, more than 40 hours a week, right? 8 hours a day, that's what doctors tell us. I would argue that my life is pretty evident that they don't know what they're talking about. But let's say they sleep 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, which leaves them with about 8 hours a day. 8 hours a day to do the yard work, to do the housework, to do the groceries, to do the laundry, to watch out for the kids, to care for his wife. You can begin to see how people feel overwhelmed with how busy life is. And you're going to knock on their door and have the audacity to suggest that they have time to give to you, somebody they don't even know. What reason do they have to give it? It's like asking a homeless man for $1. Even if I have $1, you just pulled up in a Mercedes. What reason do I have to offer you what little I have left? But you show that man something. Because all men crave things. Women, if you didn't know this, most of us suppress our desires for your sake. Men have been very good at learning how to set aside their dreams, their goals, in order to make sure that we are the providers and protectors you need us to be. You want evidence of that? Ask your husbands what they dreamed of being and doing in life when they were in high school, and then ask them how close they got. You know where the line stopped? When they said, I do. Then all of this isn't to suggest that you guys are somehow to blame. I'm not suggesting you're horrible people because you ask us to put our dreams on hold. What I'm saying is understand that that's what men sacrifice in order to marry. There is great cost. Now, I say all of that to indicate to you that men, when they receive love, they will give everything they have to it. You were taught not to express love, but we crave it on such a level that a man will give up all of his dreams and aspirations in life to attain it. You show a man the love of God, and he'll do the same thing. He will change the entire trajectory of his life to pursue that thing he has seen. He'll come to you over and over and over again. Because men, when it comes to love, we are little more than addicts. Your typical man, he gets a taste that he will come back every single time. That's what evangelism looks like. Nobody's asking you to be perfect. Nobody's asking you to be some kind of scholar. Nobody's asking you to know the ins and the outs and to learn the apologetics, to learn the debates and the arguments, to be able to quote church history. Nobody's asking you to do these things. I'm not even asking you to read all 1,000 translations of the Bible. I'm not asking you to do some big deep dive study. Just go out there and show people the purpose that God had for you. It's pretty simple, right? Right? But while you're doing that, tell them what changed your purpose. That's all it is. When you're talking to somebody, invite God into the conversation. It doesn't have to be in your face or forceful. You don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. Just mention him. Name drop him every once in a while. I promise you, God is the one person in the world that will never mind you dropping his name. Bring it in the conversation whenever you can. And when you show love, they will already associate where that love came from. People aren't evangelized through Bible studies. They learn about the thing they're already starting to believe in through Bible studies. Somebody has already taught them who God is, even if they don't recognize that that's what they learned. So to recap, you want to be lovable? You want people to love you? Show them it first. It is, after all, who you claim to be when you took on the name of Christ. The one who could tell us that the greatest form of love is for a man to give his life for a friend, and he can tell us that because he did it. because he looked at his friends, at the ones lost. He looked at the orphans and the widows of the world, and he decided that it was worth more than he was. We don't talk about that very much, but that's what Jesus is stating when he hangs on that cross. But this thing I'm doing is worth more than my life. It's a pretty high compliment. It's a pretty bold statement. Are you living up to it? I know it's a struggle. It's hard. But people are mean and cruel and just wicked sometimes. And we want nothing more than to forget they exist. What would it have been like? Picture it. Jesus walking up that mountain, carrying that crossbeam. What would it look like if he just dropped it? And he said, I've had enough. If you haven't learned by now, you're never going to learn. You've broken my heart. You've broken my trust. You disobeyed over and over and over again. No matter how hard I try, no matter what I say, you never learn. And if you apologize, how do I know you're not going to keep doing this? Imagine that image. How would the existence change? How many times have you responded to somebody like that? How many times have you thought that? How many times have you felt that way about somebody? Thank God we don't serve somebody who did that to us. Thank God it's so different from the one who accepted us. But if at the end of the day, you don't want him to look at you in heaven and say, you didn't learn. Enough is enough. This is the end of the road. You've run out of chances. But maybe we need to look at that story a little bit closer than just a story of personal hope. A man carrying a beam up a mountain because people are worth it. It's a struggle for all of us. But this morning, if you have struggled in any special way, if you have a hard time with the concepts of being lovable, you've allowed the world to harden your heart, to stain your very eyes so that you can no longer see clearly. Or maybe you have confession to make. We're told that confession is good for the soul. To confess our sins to one another so that they may pray for us. If you have struggles in life you'd like your fellow saints to pray about, or if you'd like reconciliation, whether to a brother or to the church itself, or whether maybe sometime you've witnessed that example of love, that symbol of God, and you'd like to become that yourself, the waters are waiting as they always are. Whether prayers, confession, or baptism, whatever your needs are this morning, we ask that you bring them forward and make them known so that we can help you see them met as we stand and sing.